Ed, we've known each other for a while, and I find your personal story, your journey from New Orleans through the Katrina upheaval to leading Goodwill organization, but also like now you're just like at the front edge of an industry. Honestly, doing this, I find that to be a really powerful story. When did you see this thread of that connected disaster to purpose to innovation, in part of the work that you're doing?
Mm. I think reflecting on my personal Katrina story, and it's not really a story I share in New Orleans because, I didn't wade through water,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't pop, I didn't break a hole into the roof to try to, survive, right?
Absolutely.
But in that experience, though, my wife and I were transitionally homeless for 6 weeks, right? And so we wound up having to stay kind of 9 hours away, if you're familiar with geography of the South, but wound up in Jacksonville, Florida, St. Amelia Islands. Shout out to the Holiday Inn Select out there that kind of housed and fed us, and the local Shoney's attached to it. I'll always be partial to Shoney's because they showed us some grace in a time where I didn't know it existed.
Yep.
I think.
Yep.
But our Katrina experience was, going back to New Orleans after being transitionally homeless and being 2 of 3 climate refugees that landed in Vermont. Whole other longer story. When I came home, I understood extremely quickly that the world is filled with shades of gray, right? Because when you are in survival mode, and that's all you can think of, that's all you breathe, eat, sleep, that there's a humanity in that I think that people who have never gone through a natural disaster or any kind of situation like that kind of lack that context, right? And so, in New Orleans, my growing up, both my parents were, pretty middle class. They worked in oil in New Orleans and lost their job within a month of each other when a lot of the oil businesses in the 80s moved to Houston. And so we went from middle class to poverty pretty much overnight, and the family unit never really recovered from it. And so having kind of that experience, but not really understanding that I was poor because, I was in a house that was loved.
Yep.
I had great relationships with my family and my siblings, to the Katrina experience and understanding the world is way more, is not monochromatic. When I joined Goodwill after working for a minority-owned business for 11 years in New Orleans, kind of as an entrepreneur, building my old boss's kind of black-owned business, who was just struggling and definitely veiled racism in meetings and stuff like that, and not even understanding that context, even living in New Orleans, which is a predominantly black community. Like all those little things really started added up. And then when I started working at Goodwill in New Orleans, I went to an awards banquet, and it was an awards banquet for people with disabilities. So my job in New Orleans was to find employment for people with significant disabilities. And when I was at the award summit, I was kind of feeling bad myself because the first job kind of was a divorce, 11 years, and it was tough to go. But when I saw my program participant win an award, and when I saw the joy of not only her but her family, and how the purpose of work and the dignity of work elevated everyone around her, and there were so many individuals in that room had every reason to give up, every reason to not do anything. It really kicked me in the butt. It's like, okay, if I can't do it for myself, if I can't get over my, depression at the time and all those things and self-doubt, it's like, I'm going to do it for them, right? And so understanding, like taking kind of my background and then seeing what the importance of work is and the importance of that grit and determination, it all really kind of slid in to, at that point I was hooked, right? The social enterprise of Goodwill and the ability to be an entrepreneur, yet weaponize it for good, in our social enterprise construct. I think all of it kind of flowed, and all these kind of moments of time, these crossroads, right, as I'm sure most people have, that kind of define who you are without knowing in the moment it was defining who you were or will shape you, right?
It's always kind of in the rear view mirror when you see like that realization hits you a little bit. You're not in the moment, you're just doing it. Right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I find myself now, going through my leadership journey, thinking more and more about how did I get here, right? Because I'm philosophically, I'm like an absurdist, right? Like it is absurd that I'm a CEO of a Goodwill. It is absurd that there were a few times I probably should have been dead in the ditch, right? And having grown up around or within, sometimes around criminality and drug
Sure.
addiction and all those things, it is absurd that I'm in a position. But because I understand it's absurd, I also recognize the privilege that leading a Goodwill, just being a leader within a community that can actually have some influence on change for people. I'm always cognizant of that fact, and I don't want to mess it up, right?
I want to talk about that change because Goodwill's always been a mission-driven organization, right? I mean, it's history, oldest social enterprise in the United States.
Yep.
But in your view, how does that mission need to evolve with the advent of AI and automation and these emerging technologies? Like thinking about absurdities,
Right.
like what's your view on how that mission has to evolve alongside some of these other things?
Mission of Goodwill, historically, founded by a Methodist priest out of Boston, trying to find, employment and dignity in work for people with significant disabilities originally, and gathered people's things and were rebuilding them, and then it started as like, oh, hey, can we buy that, and just kind of created this movement, this beautiful movement that now employs over 125,000 people across the country in a federated 501c3 model. I think with AI and automation and all these different things, the mission of Goodwill is about empowerment through work, right? A hand up, not a hand out. How do we help get people off of government assistance? How do we put them on a path to create generational wealth so they can overcome the barriers that typically follow criminality and health issues and mental health and all these different things? And in a world of AI where you have the democratization of knowledge and the need for expertise is starting to get blurry, eventually we're going to start questioning what does it mean to work, right? And as humans, work, hunter and gathering, all these things, our whole kind of ethos, our cultures are wrapped around the purpose and dignity of work, right?
It's
And
the
so
identity that it brings to you.
exactly, right, right. It's such a huge component of what we are. Well, now if we surely are possibly pushing toward an age of abundance, in a new, different way, where work, the meaning of work, starts getting questioned. I think we're not at the level yet where we're having those existential kind of conversations. But the reality of it is the pace of the technological change, and with the possibility of AGI and super general intelligence, perhaps. These are the real societal questions that every person, nevertheless every organization, is going to eventually try to have, right? So, but in the context of Goodwill, the reason why my Goodwill Keystone out of Central and Southeastern PA, we're leaning heavily into AI literacy as a foundational component of all of our workforce development programs, because the need for just basic AI literacy is as foundational now as financial literacy and digital literacy for low to moderate income people and families, underskilled, no skilled, reentering community, because the world's changing so damn quick. And so for us, for Goodwill, the model has to evolve to understand that we're the largest workforce development providers in the country, and I don't think a lot of people know that. Most people know us for our donated goods retail stores, and we're extremely, we're able to create our own economy because of that. But the reality of it is that foundationally, typically in industrial revolutions, the first people who are left behind are people with disabilities or barriers to employment, and so we see this as a greenfield of opportunity because now people have agency and access like they've never had before. That we have a moral, in my opinion, we have a moral obligation to make sure that the people that Goodwill serves aren't left behind in the way that historically they have been. And with income inequality, stretching, it's likely going to be even more advanced. So part of it is that I think the Goodwill model, the evolution of it, is understanding how tech is an augmentation of the human experience and not a replacement of the human experience.
So you talk about that a lot, and you've talked about that, and that's been a central theme, I think, in some of the things that you've done, is this idea that it's an augmentation and not replacement. So how do you, in the work you do specifically, maintain that dignity and agency for those in this kind of workforce transition period that we're in, or this next workforce transition era that we're in?
So I learned this from one of my mentors within the Goodwill movement. He's a CEO out of Minnesota, Dr. Michael Worth Davis, and he turned me on to this concept of you don't need organizational buy-in for change management. You need to push toward co-creation, right? And so over the last 4 years, leading Goodwill Keystone, and even here in Kansas City during my tenure here, a big part of that was bringing people to the table, right? And so the way that we've kind of operationalized and leverage generative AI and other type and computer vision, machine learning, and whatnot, is that we take a very bottom up approach where and I think a lot of organizations miss the boat on how they look at AI integration and AI evolution, and that it's not, you're not like just stacking AI on top of an existing legacy system, right? It is all about problem identification. So the most important people in that process are the subject matter experts, right? So it's the domain expertise in HR, accounting, finance, mission, whatever line of business that we have. And we have 1,550 employees. And each of them understand their business in a way that I could never, right? So it's not top down. But what it was is that we created an ecosystem within our own organization for people to come understand what the tools can do and how quickly they're changing. And then going back and basically doing old school kind of 5 why, right? Okay, here's a process, but what was the problem that process was trying to solve for? Focusing on identifying what is the root cause of the problem, and then bringing in our IT professionals to apply the right tool to that problem to solve some things, right? And so by doing that, you create this culture of co-creation where people are like, oh, wait, we can do that, and maybe we can do that. But more importantly, when we're teaching AI literacy in our workforce development programs, like at women's shelters and homeless shelters and some other, pretty high stress situations where we're finding generative AI really moving the needle is how they're using it at home, right? And so I wrote an article on nextcity.org around the notion of generative AI being a possible solution for economic mobility as it relates to time poverty being a barrier to employment. So, and I think everybody can kind of relate to, I don't have enough time to kind of whatever we want, right?
Yeah.
And so the notion of teaching individuals how to use generative AI at home, we decided to design, kind of 3 hours of curriculum of, hey, these are ways that you can use it to help move the needle for your family, right? So if you think of a single mother, 2 kids, maybe 2 jobs, she maybe has a half hour to herself a day, right? But if she can go take a picture of her pantry, of her spice rack, or a refrigerator, and be like, okay, what can I cook really quickly? Generative AI is a great answer for that. Hey, you have a roof leak, I don't know what questions to ask, take a picture of it, help you kind of gain your own agency and empowerment to where you can at least educate yourself very, very quickly about, all right, this is the type of problem this is. Gardening, right? House maintenance. So we create a curriculum, and the notion was, if we could teach people how to use it at home, they're going to have their own understanding of what it can and cannot do, and understand the ethical limitations of it, and be able to advocate for the use cases for themselves.
Yeah.
But they're going to be way more likely to adopt it at work, right? And for us, it's not about eliminating jobs. It's not about any of that. It is about, hey, we're trying to find you time. If we can find you 3 hours a week, what can you do with that 3 hours a week?
Yeah.
Profound, right? So from an economic mobility standpoint for people with barriers to employment, really generally anybody, it's that's what these tools represent, which is way different than Excel when it came out and things like that, is that now that's, the same person has, basically almost a legal scholar in some way, shapes, or forms, or a medical assistant, or, a job coach, in a way that they had 0 access, and now maybe they have 70–80% of access. And so what we find is a lot that leads into some really significant ethical conversations too.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's been a theme this morning. Is we've talked about a lot of the ethical side of AI. With previous guests that we had on, John McGillicuddy. When you were here, and you were doing the work with Artemis, which is how do you take a workforce development organization that's 100 years old or over 100 years old, and how do you start to change that mindset towards the 4th Industrial Revolution with the work you're doing with the Artemis Institute? I mean, as a disruptor, from the business side of this thing, What hurdles did you run into and face in trying to make that transition, trying to make that change, and how did you overcome some of those things to get this to be what it is?
It was a heck of a journey.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think any entrepreneur who has started up a business understands the grind, and trying to get people to understand your vision and things like that. And it was hard at first because Artemis Institute and the Artemis Initiative really was focused on the future state of work, right? And this was now seven years ago,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And when we were doing the computer vision machine learning project, where we had program participants help build a neural network 6 years ago
That's crazy.
to identify fabric composition and defects and things like that. No one really got it, right? And to the point where I was even called Chicken Little from my peers, was like, and I was nicknamed AI as a brand new young 38-year-old CEO within the Goodwill movement, I think the third or fourth youngest at the time. And having kind of that doubt when the organization was struggling a bit, and all this uncertainty, and the business need to be fixed, because if you run a nonprofit, no money, no mission,
Right.
and all the complications from that. And a lot of it was just sheer will, right? I mean, you've been an entrepreneur, what you've done with the Keystone District is absolutely sheer will, and what you've been able to build is awe-inspiring and a personal point of pride for me. But I like I learned very quickly that not everyone works at my pace, right? And and I realized how important curating a message that led to buy-in, or at least led to an understanding and trust to okay, I get what I see maybe where you're going, but I'm going to wait and see, and being okay with that, right? And so, but necessity breeds innovation, right? And so when I took over the organization, when I first got here, we had to borrow from line of credit to make payroll on my third month on the job. Like, that was kind of what I walked into, and so to go from that to be like, oh, we're going to start training people how to use robots and talk about AI and build neural nets. And they're like, what the hell are you talking about?
Seriously,
right?
yeah.
Right. But what I found was super useful was that in Kansas City, especially, there's this burgeoning entrepreneurial scene, this tech-focused scene, such a vibrant community, especially in the crossroads. And I was like, okay, I kind of am finding my tribe here to help me kind of navigate a lot of this, right? And then it just was like, okay, I need to talk to like as many people as I can to kind of share what we're doing. So fast forward after that frustration of, hey, we got a business to solve for, but then also no one really understood what Goodwill did in Kansas City. And there was a lot of intention, especially driven by my board at the time, was we need to build our brand recognition, and to the point where I wanted to build brand prestige. Because in my opinion, to do that got us to the table, right? It got us in the rooms where decisions were made that would affect my people. And so we're really deliberate about just shaking a lot of hands of people that were understanding a bit where the vision was going and where it could be. But it took a tremendous amount of time. And it took myself, and while I didn't do it right away, like I had to take a step back sometimes. It's like, okay, well, I can't say that because that freaked them out because I'm talking about stuff that they're not ready to hear. Too far, too fast, right? Yep. And so really kind of scaling that back while also understanding that, we had, hundreds of people employed that were trying to sustain their jobs. And so also separating ego from it as well, right? Because you go in a room as a nonprofit talking about building brand prestige, and they're like, well, that doesn't sound like a nonprofit leader, right? That sounds kind of ego. And, and I brought my nickname from New Orleans down, and people are like, oh, your nickname's Kingfish? Well, that's kind of pretentious, and, without understanding the background of what the word meant, and as a Louisianian. And so it just was being really deliberate about, okay, understand your audience, right? Not everyone's gonna just dive in the boat with you. And meet people where they were, right? And then so as you start stacking up the wins, and as you start seeing, oh, oh yeah, we got invited to the White House to talk about the Artemis Initiative, and that people are paying attention, and we got a government earmark right after I left to do the programs and all those things. And but those things took years, right? It took years, and you were on that journey with me for
Yeah.
a lot of it.
So now, the work you're doing at Goodwill Keystone, how much of the things that you just described from Artemis Institute, how much of those things were transferable to a new region, and
Yeah.
how much of those things were like, all right, kind of got to start over, or adapt, that's not going to work here, I got to do something different?
Yeah. So immediately I kind of set a tone of, look, we're going to be a very tech forward organization, right? So, and those silly things like we're all going to go on Teams, we're going to move away from the handwritten, calendars and things like that we were doing, and we're going to very open, transparent dialogue. And so immediately what I kind of brought to the table was we're going to invest in technology, right? And over the last 4 years, the team really embraced the notion of, all right, yeah, we're going to spend some capital. We changed 11 different IT systems to where we can start consolidating data and start being way more deliberate about data analytics and things of that sort. And that really transformed the organization, just that investment alone. And I knew the organization I was coming into in Pennsylvania, and that I had an amazing staff there already. I had extremely celebrated staff, right? Very, seasoned, like everything from 15 years to the 40-year, ace in the holes. And but all I needed to do was just show them what could be, right? And there was a lot of transition at the CEO position at the time. And I came with a very different visionary approach in a very, very culturally conservative area of the country, right? And Central PA, very Pennsylvania Dutch, kind of the epicenter of the Amish community in the United States. And my board chair jokingly said, Ed, just what I need you to know about Lancaster County in particular is that change is a 4-letter word, right? Right?
Yeah.
And so I knew right away that, okay, I'm gonna have to ease them into it, right? But what I did was I was very deliberate about sharing information. So,
Yep.
if I had a video about some new AI tool or some new kind of future state thing, I just kind of, left little rabbit crumbs to start getting people to start thinking about where the tech was going, and then we really focus on meat and potatoes operational things. And for Goodwill, we get, at least at Goodwill Keystone, we get 40 million unique items that we process a year, each its own particular SKU. And so we'll, realize very early on is that everything's a unit of time. So we're like, how do we get time back to the managers? And just these little wins that start to be like, okay, he knows what he's doing, right? He's bringing in the right talent that knows what they're doing, and just quickly establish trust. But man, once we start stacking up those wins, we grew for the last 4 years. We went from $68 million to $101 million annual revenue. We increased people served by 222%, from 2,800 people to 88 on pace now for, or actually 8,400 people at the last fiscal. And we're paying people over 22% more than when we got there on the aggregate. And we're putting more money to the bottom line to help support the mission and do all these great things. Like all of it was because people was pushed past buy-in to co-creation.
So it sounds to me a lot of what you're talking about is getting maybe the funders, the civic leaders, I'll call them the outsiders to the organization that you need to buy in or need to understand to get there. And then you also talk about the need to shift the organization's mindset using 100%. Teams, using the culture. Your written testimony about Goodwill, you talk about how many jobs are automatable, right? And the mission itself, though, getting the organization to understand the need to start to, pivot the entire mission towards this opportunity and towards these projections. You citing McKinsey projections on what the future of work looks like. How do you get a mission-driven organization operating differently is one thing. The supporters understanding maybe how you're trying to change that and focus on something else, but then to focus on something like that and change the actual work.
Yeah.
How is...
So I learned this lesson here in Kansas City with the Artemis Initiative. People have to touch it, taste it, feel it, right? AI for years was just this kind of, figment of imagination, hard to conceptualize, very ambiguous. And so what I learned here was when we brought collaborative robots here and the RecSpot and some autonomous vehicles, and our program participants are interacting with it. what I realized very, very quickly was that when the civic leaders, philanthropists, whomever, right, the VIPs of the community saw our program participants like Tim Starr, our rock star, young man, Down syndrome, actually programming a robot, right, and controlling a robot, I saw how the world shifted for the people that interacted with the technology, right? And so going to Pennsylvania, I've been very deliberate about letting people touch it, taste it, feel it, right? So those micro doses of, hey, look at this tech. Hey, have you played with this? Let's go sit down. Let me show you this, right? And at that point, organizationally, I started to get my acolytes, right, who are like become power users, or started paying attention, and they would share videos in the Teams chat and so on and so forth. So fast forward, all the talk about where we're going in tech, and them knowing that from a Goodwill movement standpoint, I was kind of leading efforts around advanced tech. They started just paying attention more, and then when we got to our next 3-year strategic plan, even my Luddite executives were like, look, I don't quite understand it. I'm afraid of AI. I don't know what it's going to do for my job, but I also recognize that this is where we need to go.
Yeah.
So at that point, it wasn't me saying it, right? It was my leadership being like, no, this is where we need to lean into. And because of them, because of their willingness to just be open to it and sharing and creating that culture where it's okay to share these things. It's even okay to go break stuff, right? Let's go tinker. Let's create the AI sandbox so you can go create in a way that's in a good, controlled, safe environment for you to bring ideas to the table. And once they have that aha with the tool, and whether it's at home or whether it's work, at that point they're in it, right? They understand. Okay, now we see the future you're talking about. So, for anyone watching that leads organizations that maybe are apprehensive about adopting the tech and things like that, that's really kind of the way to go about it. Is you lead them to water, but at the end of the day, they have to be the ones who drink. But organizationally, though, to not engage and not lean in will be at your peril, because.
Well, no, I mean, yes, let's talk about that, because you've talked about shifting the organization, shifting the mindset of the, of the city, the municipal leaders, the funders, those types of things. Again, I come back to, so now let's talk about the technology and innovation as it relates to the organization itself.
Yeah.
Like that, what is your view on these technologies and their ability to shift the ROI and the ability to deliver mission in a different model to modernize the social enterprise side of this thing? Like, how do you get them to embrace that? And is it once they've realized that the mission's shifting, once they've realized that these other things are happening, and you get this buy-in of, oh, we got to try it? Is that when that moment happens?
Yeah, I don't even know if it's about the mission shifting, right? The mission's the same, right? The mission is about awareness and about access to the tech, so people can do what's best and define success for what they feel it would be, especially people with disabilities, other barriers to employment, reentering community, whatever your barrier to employment is. So the mission, that remains the same, right?
Sure.
But at the end of the day, the messaging that I pushed to my organization, in which they bought in, the board and new board members and everybody, was understanding like the world has changed. It's not changing, it's changed once, ChatGPT became part of the mainstream, right? And so from an ROI standpoint though, the notion of time being a commodity really framing the conversation around, okay, how will this give you more time to be more productive in whatever way you want to define productivity, right? So, but I'll share some mission kind of stories, and then we'll talk a little bit more about internal. But we had a program participant, for instance, who was in a women's shelter, an extremely difficult situation, who had a car repoed, and she wanted to restore credit because she was trying to get her own place, right? Because she had been bouncing around, and so we taught her AI literacy, which is now kind of foundational for what we're doing, and said, okay, well, let's drop it in the ChatGPT. Let's see what it'll tell you, right? Let's put your problem in there and see, right? Come to find out, enough time had passed that had she called the repo company or credit company, it would have reactivated her account, and it would have put her even more in peril had she done that. And so then she started saying, well, what do I need to know? And of course, it peppers her with all these questions about, hey, talk to this person, do this. And so what she found in that moment was her own personal agency to actually empower herself to get her out of her own position in a way that, had she not had that opportunity to learn these skills, she may have damaged herself and made it even more difficult for her to get out of the situation that she was in. I had a colleague tell me that the first time that she got it was her mother was passing away from cancer and in hospice, and she used generative AI to help plan kind of end of life. But what she said was, it gave me more time with my mom. Right, it allowed me to ask the questions of her before she passed that I would have never thought of, and so the moment she got it, when she was apprehensive about it, was that it gave me time back from my mom, and that's when she got it. Right, so what we're finding is that as we're teaching these tools, things like advanced prompt engineering and AI at home and all these things, that's where it's moving massive needles. And you're not talking about, I did this great project. No, you're talking about, I got more time on my dying mom.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to be able to get out of this battered women's shelter. And so those are where the most powerful stories are. And so when our employees hear these stories, they become even more emboldened and more empowered to really lean into the tech. But from a business standpoint for us, I talked about that co-creation, is that they're identifying problems that were legacy problems that had maybe old process, bad processes, and they're reimagining how these things can work. And really, it's about bringing AI alongside the journey, right? It's about your AI being your own personal assistant, help you kind of flesh things out and things like that. And so everything from the HR standpoint, we dropped our handbook into model. And it's like, hey, what risks are here, right? Anything in the policy is illegal, or things like that. And that moved the needle. One of the cool use cases is we created an agent where you can have a conversation with your handbook. And we're like, well, why don't we use it as a way for new employees to kind of feel connected to this broader 125-year-old history of Goodwill. And so we load it with a lot of Goodwill history and things like that, and you can have a conversation about Goodwill history. And then we're sitting in a room in our AI Forge, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but we're like, well, what if we can find an old audio recording of the founder of Goodwill, right? And so we found a 1920s radio recording, and we pulled his voice and kind of replicated his voice and his cadence of the 1920s in Boston. And then we took a step back. It's like, all right, hold on, that's really cool, but I know the grandson of the founder of Goodwill. I better call him up and be like, hey, are you okay with me kind of resurrecting, your grandfather? And of course he was cool with it, because he didn't know him very well. I think he was younger when he passed away. And I was like, I want to take him on a road show and have a conversation with my grandfather when he visits other Goodwills. But going back to the ethics conversation, in that room we had an employee that tragically passed away unexpectedly, and I had posed a question. I said, now what if we recreated her in the same way? How would we feel about that, right? And of course the room got really emotional. No, that's a step too far. And so what we're finding is that as we're building these different agents and pathways to agentics, it's like, just because we can, should we? Right? And so there's so many different projects that are starting to percolate that, all right, now we're on the cusp of ethical conversations that we hadn't really considered. But what that does, though, again, going back to the co-creation, is that we're all part of that ethical conversation. It's like, all right, what do we feel comfortable with? What should we do? Right? In a world where AI is there's very little regulation, and the notion of personal agency in the world of democratized knowledge, when you hear the conversations about people, ChatGPT or LLMs helping people commit suicide, or maybe using it to hack, and all these different kind of societal questions, we're not ready or equipped to engage in, okay, well, what does that mean, right?
So we open the door to what's probable or what's possible, but now what should we do?
Exactly. Well, and my concern is that the narrative is going to be controlled by big tech, going to be controlled by big corp, and they're going to try to regulate the use for the people that Goodwill serves in a way that's going to be harmful, right? Because if you're Sally Joe who has 2 kids, 3 jobs, whatever the situation is, and you can't go to college to go learn how to be an accountant, or you can't go to college to go learn how to be a legal scholar or whatever it would be. Now all of a sudden you have access to a tool that maybe only gets you 80% there. How do we define whether or not that's good enough or not, right? When she had 0% of access, now all of a sudden has 80% access. That may be, may not give her all the right information, maybe a little clunky, maybe even give her bad information in a world where the misinformation is everywhere. How do we define personal agency in the age of AI, right? Is that I don't think it is a problem for that person to have 80% of the tool there if I'm being deliberate about teaching her why it's only 80%, right? And so those are the things, as AI starts changing everyone's lives and how higher ed is being disrupted by every educational institution is trying to figure out how to do this thing. And the reports out of MIT that cognitive ability is starting to shrink when people are over-relying on it. All these things, and we are ill prepared to even understand the complications that are coming, right?
Right.
And so as Goodwill, as a nonprofit leader in workforce development and all these different things, like part of it is like, all right, if we're not leaning in, being 10 minutes from 80% of every American in our footprint, who is, right?
Yeah.
And so we've kind of taken upon ourselves at Goodwill Keystone and the broader Goodwill movement to start engaging in this dialogue and trying to find our own journey and build a bridge while we cross it, but also understanding, oh wow, that's going to have a really profound effect on everyone that comes through our door.
We hosted a panel here. It was during one of the Kansas City AI Club meetups, and it was on, it was actually related to digital health KC. Anyway, it was a panel of healthcare providers talking about AI. And it was interesting to hear them talk about how they are at the forefront of ethical, because you talk about the ethical uses of AI in that healthcare decision-making space.
Yeah.
How should doctors use it? How shouldn't they use it? What are the implications of those things? It was just fascinating to hear, who is going to be pushing the envelope on where you draw the line.
Yes.
And I do think the nonprofit or social services sector, where you're dealing with these safety net issues or dealing with these issues related to people very directly, healthcare being another one of those, you have to be at the front of those decisions and these conversations, and those, asking the questions at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, even to the point where being cognizant about the people that are trying to make the decisions, right? Or the groups, not people necessarily, but the groups, right? I mean, a capitalistic system requires stakeholders and all those things. And again, I'm a full-blooded, American capitalist.
Yep.
Leading a nonprofit, right? I understand what that means for job creation, no money, no mission kind of thing, right? But at the end of the day, my concern, though, for the people that I serve is that the people making those determinations aren't really looking at the people that we serve directly on how it's going to impact them. So I was having a conversation with one of my doctors, and I took a picture of an x-ray of my foot. And I asked him, I said, how are you interacting with it? It's like, oh, we use it for transcription, during conversations and all that, but we haven't really looked at some of the things. And I said, well, let me show you something, right? So I loaded my x-ray into ChatGPT. This was before 5.0, by the way. This is 4.0, whichever version I was using at the time. And I loaded it up. I said, hey, what do you see, right? Do you see any injuries? What do you see? And if you do see injuries, what do you recommend, right? Gave me 90% of the answer of the doctor who I met the morning of that I spent $100 on and probably $200 for the x-ray at some point. Gave me 90% of the answer, right? And so for him, it was like, I need to pay attention, right? I did the exact same thing with a lawyer buddy of mine who said, I said, are you using AI in any kind of way in your firm? And she was like, no, I got enough dumb lawyers working with me. I don't need more, right? I said, that's fair. I was like, to all my legal friends, I love you. But part of it was the conversation around, the fear of the use cases and things like that. And so we happened to have a conversation about nonprofits and taxes and all that stuff, and trying to get, what that is for actually my son's football, nonprofit league, whatever. But and so I'm sitting in the car watching my son play football. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put that use case in. I'm going to send it to him, right? And so it gave me this beautiful kind of dossier of, hey, this is the approach, this is how you should go do it, here are the pitfalls, whatever. And it all was accurate on mine because I'm an expert in that stuff, right?
Yep.
And so I sent it to him, and his response when he came back is, okay, I need to pay attention. Because again, if your job is requiring the written word, right, or something, or digital and things like that, if you're not having at least a little bit of existential crisis, you're already behind.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Right, and but there are real world implications of, hey, I can't just use AI to go, file a legal brief and, 100%, like all of that is accurate. Same on the medical side. But then I go back to Sally Joe or John Doe, who had, John Doe re-entering from the criminal justice system, coming into a brand new world after serving 4 years in prison. Now all of a sudden, all right, I have these legal issues that I don't have access or the money to go get a lawyer, and maybe the public defender is too busy. Now all of a sudden, I'm empowered, my own legal expert that may be 80, 90% right. Who are we to say that that person shouldn't use that, right? Or if I don't have health insurance, and I know I have an injury, but I don't know the severity of the injury, but maybe ChatGPT or Gemini or one of these models can help me, determine, all right, how serious is it? Take a look at it. Then at that point, you're valuing the value in expertise in general. And where my concern is that when the regulation starts coming, whether at the state level or local level, the people that are really going to push the regulations are the ones that historically haven't figured out a way to monetize it or control where the money goes.
I had the opportunity to see Nate Bargatze recently, and it was great because he was talking about how dumb the smart people were because they created AI. Because what you've basically done is you've given all the people who aren't smart the tools to be smart, and the thing that kept you apart was knowledge.
Exactly.
And you broke that.
Yeah.
And do you realize what you've done?
Yes.
And he was making light of it in comedy, but like all I could sit there and think about was, he's right. Like
exactly.
This is irony humor of like, this is what's actually going to happen.
It
right?
absolutely is. And I think people have a hard time grasping the fact that, it's kind of the zombie apocalypse paradox, which I heard from a speaker named Roman Cass. I think his name is Roman Cass, former OpenAI go-to-market guy, the first go-to-market guy. And he used this analogy of the zombie apocalypse paradox. He's like, if I asked you, I was like, hey, do you think your neighbor would survive the zombie apocalypse? Like, oh no, John would be dead overnight.
First to
right?
go.
Yeah. It's like, well, what about you? You think you'd be? It's like, oh yeah, I could survive. I could survive at least this and that. It's the same principle with AI. Is that people are like, oh, I used the tool maybe a year and a half ago and it was clunky, and without realizing that that was in its infancy, and now it's passing PhD level coursework and tests. And I think there's a general consensus of people not seeing how it could replace them. And yet, what I tell my team all the time is like, that's actually a very healthy viewpoint of, okay, this can replace me, but how can it replace me? Like, start there, right? Really leaning into the tech and understanding at least what the potential is and where it's going, and be okay with a little bit of that fear of, hey, it could replace me, but how can it replace me? And if I know how it can replace me, I can double down on how it can't. Right? And more importantly, I can understand where I can add more value, because I can focus on the strategic, the creative, that human-to-human connection in my job that AI isn't going to be able to do, at least for now, and understand where work will shift, but where the value will come, right? And the importance of that human-human connection and strategy and creativity, that AI isn't just there yet, but it's going there, and don't assume that it's not.
And sooner than you think. Sooner than you think, for sure.
Exactly.
And this is one of those instances where we always talk about the potential future technologies. And it always takes longer. This is one where we're going to underestimate. We're going to underestimate what's going on and what's happening if we're not paying attention.
Oh, absolutely. Well, in the narratives around, this is another tech bubble, or, it's interesting kind of debating whether or not AI is a tech bubble, or if we're entering the trough of delusionment, if
it's the fastest human adoption of a technology in our existence.
Exactly.
And it's not even close.
Well, exactly. Well, and we're still testing the limits of scaling laws, right? I try to explain scaling laws. Scaling laws basically says that if you match compute with parameters and data, that AI has not hit the limit of how good it can be, as long as you're still adding those things. So like the $800 billion of investment that's come for AI development, most of it's going toward energy rights, water rights, infrastructure, right? But that takes time. So we haven't even seen what the models can really do because the infrastructure isn't built yet to test scaling laws, to prove out that scaling laws actually have an end or maybe it doesn't, right? It's why the money's going into it. But at the end of the day, $800 billion is buying infrastructure, land, all these things that are assets that can be turned a different way. And from, we get a lot of conversations doing the work at Goodwill around, well, Goodwill's all about sustainability, right? Because, we repurpose and recycle, everything that we get donated in a store, and understanding how the tech is going to kind of help that. Well, we're pushing people to use AI to build their agency and their awareness so they can understand where the world is going. But then there is these conversations about these things. And like in my neck of the woods, you had Microsoft that acquired the rights to 3 Mile Island, which, for those of you that don't know, there was a meltdown back in the 70s.
Oh, that makes me feel old that you have to say that.
I know,
anyway,
right.
Yeah.
And but they acquired energy rights, and so, but also it's on the Susquehanna River, and you need a lot of water to cool those systems, right? And so, like, we're not even having conversations around, how are these deals built? Now, I'll say for Pennsylvania, I'm proud of the fact that we have a governor and we have leadership there that is pushing for this infrastructure, but then also trying to be cognizant of the fact that, hey, can this be a value add to those communities where these farms are coming up? Can it generate more energy? Can we make sure that it doesn't drive costs up? Because 10% of all energy production by 2030 is going to be for AI development.
Yeah.
Now, are we competing with big tech for energy and water rights? Like, it's a massive conversation that is starting to percolate, I think, out there. But if it's done with intentionality, and if it's done with like, hey, this is going to be a boon for everybody. Like, we don't want you to compete for energy and water. But I mention all that because it's hard as a nonprofit to try to find that blend of, yeah, we recognize this is amazing tech. Yeah, there's some sustainability questions out there, but it doesn't mean that it's a win-lose situation either.
Yeah, it's a good transition to the next thing I want to talk about, which is more leadership and insight that you've gained through this journey. So, doing the work that you're doing right now, you have to manage, or you have to balance mission, margin, organizational transformation, which is kind of what you're leading, or even industrial or the shift of the work that the entire Goodwill ecosystem is and how it's looking at it. But in balancing those things as a leader, and I've always admired your lead, like your vision and your ability to actually inspire people to move in that direction. You as a leader is I think been impressive to watch, and still impressive to watch. What's been like the hardest or most humbling part of that, like the toughest leadership lesson that you've kind of learned through this journey?
I think there's been several. There's definitely been several. I think I think for me, being able to have the awareness of when to take a step back and not put the pedal on the metal all the time, because the last thing I want to do is crush hope, right? And I think I reflect a lot on the notion of I think the most corrosive thing in the universe is false hope. Right, and so, even with the Artemis Initiative here, we're pushing robotics and we're pushing AI, and 7 years ago, and try to get people to think differently about where the world was going. There was always that fine line of showing our program participants the tech and the families of our program participants that, hadn't seen what could be in the future, but then also not over-promising and under-delivering, right? And so part of my fear in what I saw out there of people pushing narratives around advanced tech was, it was all about the hype cycle, right? And it was all about getting a headline. It was all about these things. And while there's value in that in order to kind of build awareness and brand and things like that, there's a significant aspect of false hope. And when someone loses hope, it is so hard to climb out of that hole, right? I mean, that was kind of one of the leadership lesson I learned was before I was truly the leader that I kind of am today, was when I had to swallow my pride and go beg that hotel manager at that Holiday Inn that, hey, I'm broke. Hey, I haven't heard from my family in a week. They're stuck in Mississippi with no way of communicating, and my wife's family was 8 to a hotel room and 60 hours away because I-10 fell in the water. Like, what it took for me to humble myself, even though I had grown up without means in a lot of ways, to still go have the courage to go ask for help, and for him to give me the grace to be like, I got you, complete stranger, right? So the biggest leadership lesson was understanding where the people that come to Goodwill to ask for help, what it took just to ask for help,
Yeah.
right? And it's the same thing from an entrepreneurial lens. For an entrepreneur to be like, look, I'm a startup, I need help, right? And knowing you don't have all the answers, but still having the courage to go ask for help, and still adding value before you ask for help, but still the courage it takes to ask for help. And when I think of what it took for me, the shame, the guilt, the uncertainty, all of the things that typically holds us back, to overcome that, to just ask for help, because I was desperate. I was desperate for my wife. I was desperate for my family. I had no other choice. My leadership moment was that the reason why we push this, the reason why we talk about what can be as much as what should be, is that I need to honor the courage it took for someone to walk in our doors. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's where it starts. If I can't match their courage, if I can't match their sense of urgency to get them out of that situation, then I'm doing a disservice to the people in my community, right? And so I think and again, I'm not saying that trauma is always the best place to lead from. I'm not saying that, because it's definitely has caused me to make bad decisions before as well. But at the end of the day, if you're doing it for the right purposes, you can eat your cake and have your cake and eat it too, right? And so, but to see how lives have been changed, even with your work here, and just signing, like getting you into this space, and seeing what you've been able to build, as leaders, we don't get a chance to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, wow, that was pretty cool, But I think from a leadership standpoint, it all goes back to those moments, right? And then how do you reflect, and how do you not cause harm? I think that's my biggest driver, is I'm just trying to eliminate as much suffering as I can. Maybe I see down the road a little bit further than most on what the suffering could be, but I also see opportunity in everything as well, because I got that entrepreneurial spirit, right?
So I guess that's my next question. So like what you've learned and what you've accumulated as a leader through these processes or through this experience is one thing, but is the mindset that's carried you through these shifts, is that the entrepreneurial spirit? Is that, or what mindset, what like leadership mindset or leadership principle has been most consistent and has carried you through these changes that you've been through?
It absolutely the entrepreneurial mindset, right? It's that grit, it's that hustle. It is that kind of flying by the seat of your pants sometimes. But then what I realized with being in that mindset, what I gravitate to, the two things that I love most about my job and that my board has allowed me to be, is autonomous and creative, right? And that's what entrepreneurs thrive off of, right? I can craft my own vision, my own future, and I can bring people along for the journey, but also recognize that I can't do it alone, right? And a lot of entrepreneurs, it's a very lonely existence, right? It's a very similar, I mean, again, an entrepreneurial CEO is no different than a Goodwill, any CEO in the chair, that when you sit in the chair, it is extremely lonely, right? Because there you're going to be decisions that are, this will either make us or they will break us. And it's hard for people who haven't had that sense of autonomy or authority to be like, oh, this can be the end if I make this wrong decision. And that can be a very, very lonely situation.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And so part of it is the drive to be creative and have the autonomy to kind of be, I joke around, I'm more like Bruce Lee in that I flow like water, right? Like I know the destination I'm trying to get to. If I need to get to LA to New York, it's not a straight line for me. I'm gonna let the universe kind of serendipitously show me where the road is going,
right?
As long as I get to that final destination. I think a lot of people think incrementally instead of in this new world of tech with uncertainty and ambiguity. The mindset needs to be reversed. It's like, okay, I know that's where I need to go, but now I'm going to cast a large net. I'm going to talk to a lot of people. I'm going to share my vision. I'm going to find my tribe and, make those connections to help me get to where I want to go. Now, do I land in New York, or maybe I land in Sheboygan, or maybe I land in DC, but yet both, those places could be great and cool, and allow yourself the grace to be able to be okay with off-center success.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that is definitely the entrepreneurial journey, right?
Right?
Like
Yeah.
where you think you're going, where you end up might be very different. But there's the, we always talk about this. Don't solve it. Fall in love with the problem.
Yeah.
Don't fall in love with the solution.
Exactly.
Because you never know the solution that's going to actually solve the problem.
Yeah.
And good entrepreneurs fall in love with the problem.
Exactly.
So,
That's
yeah.
exactly it.
So let me ask you, Ed, if you were able to redesign the next iteration of Goodwill, right? Where you're talking about you've had to transform, you've had to transition like some really ingrained behaviors and societal implications of workforce development and the people who you serve, some of those types of things. But if you were able to redesign the next iteration of Goodwill, infrastructure, training, process, any of those types of things, what would it look like, and how would it better serve the communities, that you serve today that have been left behind?
I can't answer that only because the future is so uncertain. It's so uncertain for many different reasons, whether it's political, geopolitical, whether it is technology. The world is uncertain. So the shift that I would have is, and this is probably for every organization, is the ability to be agile, right? The ability to live in ambiguity or thrive in ambiguity and to kind of build a culture that allows you to fail, but fail fast, right? That allows you to be creative and test the boundaries and things like that. So from a Goodwill standpoint, for me, it is all about putting tools in people's hands, awareness to what could be, and allow people to surprise you, right? Because when you give agency, when you give opportunity, when you give the tools or show what could be, people rise to the occasion, right? And so for me, it's more of a philosophical shift in that let's have conversations about things like isolationism as a pandemic and loneliness that is kind of really running rampant and is even going to be propelled through tech. Or let's have a conversation about, when 4.0 went to 5.0, ChatGPT, you reread it enough, you saw that people were mourning the loss of this, job coach or this, assistant or, this therapist in a way, right? I'm not saying that these are good things, but at the end of the day, you're not going to put the toothpaste back in the tube, right? So it's about how are you going to adapt quickly, understanding that the state of the world, the state of the universe is constant change and is not going back to some sort of static, evolution of itself, and to allow Goodwill to be open to the change, so we can be responsive in our local environments, right? Because again, the problems in New York City are going to be different than Kansas City than they are going to be in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, right? So the beauty of our social enterprise construct is, we have brick and mortar, retail stores. We have the sustainability aspect of what we do. We have the supply chain, all those business things that we're best in class in a lot of ways. Because we produce one of one thing. We're one of very few organizations in the world that have one of one SKU, and the complexities of that, which is kind of my entrepreneurial lens, is that there's a million problems to solve, and I love it, to your point. But at the end of the day, the beauty of our social enterprise at Goodwill is that we can be agile in our marketplaces. We can respond quickly to the needs of the market in ways that traditional nonprofits can't, because we have this economic engine of the stores that help design and help push our workforce development, our reentry services, our community involvement, and to stay true to that, right? But at the end of the day, Goodwill, along with everyone else, if AI proves out to be what the tech bros feel like it can be, if that future is the reality, we need to sit down and talk about, well, what does it mean to work, right? What does it mean to be human if we don't need to work, right? And societally, especially Western culture, that we take great pride in our ability to break our back to provide for our families, and which is the American way. Well, if that starts getting eroded, especially white collar jobs, we have bigger issues that we need to at least discuss. And so us being grassroots in those problems, my hope is that the Goodwill movement embraces that opportunity, embraces that leadership position. And I think we are, right? And we had 60 Goodwill CEOs across the country go spend a week at MIT to learn about AI and what's coming. and energize the movement about, okay, yeah, we not only from a business standpoint, right, to keep the social enterprise alive, but more importantly, how are we going to communicate this in workforce development? How are we going to educate our people? And so I'm very proud of the Goodwill movement and the leaders within the Goodwill movement that they are leaning in and embracing at least the understanding of what it is, right? Because I think that's the first step.
Yeah, and for you, for you though, it's not just a hope. It's not just a, I asked the question in the, like, if you could design the next iteration of this, you're kind of forcing this into, this federated goodwill ecosystem of so on. So you've got something coming up. You've got this AI summit coming up.
Yeah, no, our Goodwill Keystone in Hershey, Pennsylvania, December 3rd and 4th, we're hoping the first Goodwill AI networking summit, where we're having a kind of tech agnostic approach. We'll have OpenAI there, Microsoft there, Google there, and we have a panel with university presidents talking about AI in education. And part of it is that the people that are coming are executives around the country, but they're all subject matter expertise in different things, HR, finance, accounting. And the point is, hey, understand where AI is today, understand a little bit about where it's going, but these are practical applications of the tools that you can use to help improve your business.
Sure.
And more importantly, improve your mission delivery and how you're serving people, right? So we have a partnership with OpenAI where we're working on how do we automate the workforce development kind of pathway, with resume writing, career ladders, and things like that, and having conversations around the fact that people that are power users that are looking for jobs in the market, they can apply 100 jobs in an hour, whereas most people can apply to one job in an hour, and how that's creating an inequality, for the people that Goodwill serves. And so we'll be talking a lot about philosophy and the pace of change and things like that in our world, but they're going to come learn tools on, hey, you can do this better in your mission department. You can do this better in your HR department using a lot of these tools to become more modern organizations. And the notion there, the philosophy there is that if they go back and use some of these tools, they're more likely to be able to advocate on behalf of the people that Goodwill serves on ethical and moral use cases, what works and what doesn't. And my hope is that after that summit, we're brought to the table across the country to kind of engage in the conversation, because it can't just be all about investments in infrastructure.
Yep.
It can't be all about super intelligence or AGI. There's a human component to this, right? And yeah, there are geopolitical issues that are driving the developments of it. We recognize that. But we cannot leave people behind. And that's the beauty of generative AI, is that if we do it with intentionality, if we do it with purpose, it can be an equalizer. It's a green field of opportunity, because now I can vibe code and full out my vision, or I can have a conversation with my AI about, I've had this idea, this business I wanted to build, and you can help me build a business plan. You can help me build a loan application, and these types of things, right? And so my hope is that Goodwill's, after that conference, and hopefully we'll have many conferences after, is that they're going back into their community and engaging in that conversation about, look, we are going to be a leader in this space, because if we are not a leader in this space, who will be? Right? And so that's my hope. That's my hope of the conference.
Yeah, no.
And we sold the thing out, man. We'll have about 300
so
people coming.
It was twice the size.
I wish it was twice the size. We went in thinking that we're going to have 110 people, and it's going to take 3 months to fill it up. We filled it up. We sold out within 3 weeks, and scary and pride. We can't mess it up. But it just shows the urgency, right? And that we're a federated nonprofit, federate model of nonprofits. We all have our board of directors. We're all independent organizations, but we have this powerful construct that we can be collegial and learn together and learn best practices. And it's the beauty of the Goodwill movement. But we're also a massive organization, right? We're an $8.5 billion federated model entity that's doing some pretty profound work in every community that we're in. Yeah. That most people don't realize that what we do, and if Goodwill's went away tomorrow, what would be the societal impacts of that? It's pretty profound. But it's something I take great pride in. And so my hope is that people see what I've been seeing for years, and I think they are. And lean in, right? Lean in. Don't be afraid of it. Because if you're afraid of it, it's a good thing. You should be afraid of it. And that should drive you to want to understand it before it runs over you. And I tell people that all the time. It's like, AI is not going to replace you. It's a common tagline now. AI is not going to replace you, but people who use AI will replace you.
Yeah, facts, for sure,
You know?
for sure. Well, listen, my friend, I've learned so much from you about mission, you know, about how to translate vision into, the reality of organizational transformation, some of those other things. So, um, I'm proud to know you, man. I'm the impact you've had on even what we do here. You mentioned it earlier. So, on one hand, I want to say, thanks, but on the other hand, keep doing it, man.
Well,
You're making change.
man, that's
You're
the
making
same
change.
thing.
You're making change more broadly. Like I always talk to people about positive conspiracies, like the opportunity if people can, if people are saying good things when you're not around, and I think you witnessed it when you came back. There's a bunch of people you didn't know that are here delivering on a mission that you kind of set out, and they were anxious to meet you because they understand the vision and the ability to make that transformational change for the people that you serve too. So, thanks, man.
Well, look,
Thanks for doing it.
and I'm going to say the same thing back to Kevin. I mean, coming back here to see what you built, the amount of blood, sweat, and tears, even before I left, I understood what you took to build this up, Kevin. Your leadership in Kansas City and eventually nationwide, I think, you're creating a new standard of what a community looks like that helps uplift people with good ideas, with good intentions, and it is the model that Keystone has created that I think is the future of what entrepreneurial should be, right? Is that if we are pushing toward an age of abundance, we need smart people thinking about how are we going to use this for good, whether it's their business or AI or whatever it is. And so I'm in awe, and I'm so proud to see what you've created, man, because I remember the conversations and I remember the journey and the journey that continues. And I'm just honored to be a small part in what that was. And for the viewers, y'all don't know this, but I'm gonna share a little insight. My last functional thing with this organization in Kansas City was to sign the lease for Keystone. And it's one of the most transformational decisions that I'll reflect back in my career and be like, yeah, that was some cool shit.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you sharing your story, man.
Same here, brother. Appreciate you. I love you.
Yeah, thanks. Same. Thanks.